are going to be covering fuel contamination kits in today's presentation. So one of the questions to kick it right off is why contamination kits? Kits have been more relevant within the past 10 years. Couple factors here. The emission regulations have gotten stricter and have led to introduction of DEF, diesel exhaust fluid. Some have accidentally poured it into the diesel fuel tank simply because of the name diesel exhaust fluid. Quite common to be an accidental contamination. The OE has also, of no aid, made it pretty simple to accidentally pour the DEF fluid into the fuel tank. As you can see to the bottom left here, the picture of on a Ford, the DEF filler neck and the diesel fuel filler neck are right next to each other. And if I'm correct, on the Dodges, it is the same way. On the Duramax, they did us all a favor by putting that up under the hood, making it a little bit more accidental proof. Tighter tolerances and more components, moving components inside of the current modern fuel system and contamination usually do not end well. Catastrophic failures are bound to happen. Exposed filler necks as well with our tighter tolerances are contributors to debris and contamination. On the bottom right-hand side there, you see a filler neck on the back end of a Ford cab chassis application. It's completely exposed to the elements. Us folks here in the Midwest, we see a lot of salt and grime getting kicked up. Sure, you have a mud flap, but that still doesn't prevent all the debris, gunk from getting built up around there. And I mean, let's face it, these guys that are on the construction site are driving around these cab chassis applications. They're fill it up and let's get going. You know, they're not taking the time to get it nice and clean or whatever. I mean, if it was me, I'd probably be on the same boat to get to the job site and let's get going. You know, and over time, debris can fall down the side and can start falling inside and over time affecting the system. It's also impossible flushing out these here components once a contamination has been introduced into the fuel system. The fuel injectors, the pumps, the rails, fuel coolers in some applications, they all contain sharp turns, small passages, hidden cavities that are impossible to see, visually inspected, and to visually inspect that you flushed everything out. The OEs have started out with a list of recommended parts to replace to now also having their contamination kits because of the frequency of these cases. One topic I want to cover is the fuel contamination kits for off-highway applications. Currently, Alliant Power does not offer any contamination kits for the off-highway applications, but it is been a request. I've had conversations with customers asking about it. Not only have we had requests, but we've had to do a few here in our facilities. The two that really come to mind are Bobcat applications. In the two cases that we had here at our facilities, we both found complaints about runnability issues, derating, missing, etc. Both times we found fuel system related fault codes. We ended up doing our basics, you know, make sure supply, no restrictions, etc. And once we narrowed everything off, checked everything else good, we ended up taking a fuel sample from the rail. Each time that, in these two cases, each time we found metal in the fuel system. So where did that metal come from? We suspect that metal coming from a low, poor quality fuel. The manufacturers on these off-highways too, they're also using diesel exhaust fluid. And they're putting them in a similar area that it's not going to be getting smashed, damaged, or hit. For example, the Bobcats have got them on the back end by the diesel fuel filler neck. So in the modern fuel system, we are seeing fuel pressures up to 29,000 psi. When fuel pressure is moving that high, is up that high, its fuel pressure is moving at a quite fast velocity. So any sort of debris that's inside of the fuel system will be moving quite fast, and it'll start eroding at components fairly quickly. Not only does it start eroding at components or the metals inside, but it can create more debris branching off, so you get more flakes coming off, and that's how more of the metal contamination comes to happen. In your modern system, you have up to 7. You can see up to, on some of these, depending on the manufacturer, you can see up to 7 injections per combustion sequence. Any sort of foreign debris inside of that fuel, inside of the fuel system, will interrupt the sequence of injections and can lead to running issues, intermittent running issues, etc. Introduction of piezo injectors. Back when I was in the fuel shop, we had requests of when they first came out, and now that you learn a little more about it, you kind of think back. In this case, myself, we would see some write-ups or customer accidentally put DEF in the fuel system. Well, you find out, see how corrosive it is, or if they got metal in the fuel system and they try flushing them out. Well, the piezo system's got little stacks inside of there, and trying to get those stacks clean is impossible, and to make sure that everything inside of the piezo injectors is also very impossible. The introduction of the CP4. The CP4 was introduced to meet the performance needs by the manufacturers with these higher rail pressures that were being needed. There were some design flaws, but the design flaw being it is sensitive to aeration, but you take care of that fuel system properly, you got guys going 200,000 miles on the CP4. I know a lot of people out there deem him as the ticking time bomb, but with adequate maintenance and care to that vehicle, these trucks can go quite some time without seeing any sort of catastrophic failure. And the introduction of the ninth injector. The LML started in 2011 and introduced the ninth injector into the after treatment system. So although the ninth injector does not see any high rated fuel pressure like the injectors, the fuel circuit is still being shared, and you have any sort of contaminants in that system, it's still going back to that injector. It's kind of a overlooked item. If there's any sort of contaminants and neglected to replace the ninth injector, you could see the nozzle being possibly hung up and causing a drippy nozzle, leading to premature wear in the after treatment system. The types of contamination, I got a list here to the left: diesel exhaust fluid, DEF, water/bore fuel, debris, gasoline, biofuel, which, I mean, it's not as heard of nowadays, but we'll get a little bit into that, and incorrect or non-approved diesel fuel additives. DEF fluid is made out of 32.5 urea dissolved in deionized water. DEF fluid, when it dries, it crystallizes, and aside from that, it is extremely corrosive and harmful towards metals. Like I mentioned earlier, it is a very common accidental contamination scenario. The water in the fuel, water can come from a bad fuel source. Water in the fuel will not only create rust in the fuel system, but it can also cut the lubricity characteristics that are found in diesel fuel that is needed. If you guys have customers on the road who are constantly on the road, it's prone to happen. You never know when you might get a bad batch of fuel and get some water in the system. So for those who are unaware, Alliant Power does have its own diesel fuel additive, which we will talk about a little bit later on. Debris, as mentioned earlier, it can get introduced by by not cleaning the area of the diesel fuel neck and just kind of fall itself naturally. Depending on the size of the debris, it can bypass the filter. Gasoline is another common contaminant, and when it is mixed in with diesel fuel, it acts as a solvent and it cuts the lubrication characteristics that come naturally from the diesel fuel. And as mentioned earlier, the biofuel is not as common, but it is still out there. Not as common as now because of the fuel prices being a little bit lower compared to 10, 12 years ago. I remember back then you'd get a set of injectors in off of Volkswagen, especially where the French fry oil fuel was more popular. This stuff was just nasty, just gummy and gooey, and trying to clean that stuff off even with an ultrasonic cleaner was very time consuming. So now imagine that being inside of a highly sophisticated common rail system. It's not the easiest thing to be cleaning. In the next slide here, we got a fuel sample of diesel exhaust fluid and fuel in a jar. The top half you can see labeled fuel, and the bottom half is the diesel exhaust fluid. This is a sample that we had pulled out of a fuel tank here in our facilities. So it was an accidental situation, but one thing that I want to point out here is imagine that jar being a fuel tank. The fuel sending unit is going to be sitting at the bottom, and where's the fuel going to be sucked from the bottom. So depending on the manufacturer, you hit the push start button and you're going to get the transfer pump. For a Ford example, you're going to click it, transfer pump starts, and the introduction of the diesel exhaust fluid starts going through the fuel system. So what happens after that, once it gets introduced into your system, the diesel fuel over time, it will crystallize as pictured on there to the left-hand side. It amazes me that when I was trying to do some research, see what the guys are doing out there in the field, it's still kind of amazing that these guys out there are, if you get introduction of DEF fluid into the fuel system, some of these guys are pouring diesel fuel additive. Well, obviously draining the tank, pour some fresh fuel and a diesel fuel additive, and they are trying to flush out components to try to save them. So just to kind of give you guys an idea of how bad and corrosive this stuff is, we did a little experiment here in-house. This is a fuel rail pressure sensor. Put it in half diesel fuel and half diesel exhaust fluid. Shook that thing up vigorously, and that fluid always sits at the bottom and the fuel always rises. But this was a nice clean sensor that in a 24-hour period, it began creating rust, as you can see down there at the bottom. So another thing we did here was after the 24-hour period, I pulled it out of the jar. I let it sit for about an hour. Yes, I let it sit for about an hour, and you can see the crystallization starting to form on the actual sensor. I actually have that same sensor here, and after a couple 48-hour bases, you can really start seeing the crystal starting to really grow here. So just think of that being in the fuel system and trying to wash that stuff out. Not only trying to wash out the diesel exhaust fluid, but trying to clean that rust off. So here we got a picture of a, excuse me, got a picture of a injection, a nozzle off of injector, and it got a little bit of we have some debris in that fuel system. You can notice the erosion at the nozzle sealing seat due to debris being in the system. Having a having a beat up nozzle seat like that will cause a leaky nozzle tip, and having a leaky nozzle tip in some cases will cause the RPMs kind of hang up and come down very choppy. It can also lead to some smoking issues. And not all the time, and most of the time this won't throw a fault code of any sort. So another perspective here to debris in the fuel system is this valve set from Bosch and from a non-piezo injector. The circled item there to the left is with the arrow to it, is one of the feed orifices. That orifice, to give you an idea, is about 300 microns, about 0.3 millimeters in diameter. As you can see, there is a piece of debris being wedged down there in the middle. Looks very odd-shaped. So any sort of debris, in this case, obstructing that gallery, will offset the pressures, will not let that valve seat the nozzle properly, causing a free-flowing injector, aka stuck open nozzle. If that piece of debris were to do that, not only are you affecting your fuel system, but you are also potentially, if this were to happen at high speeds, you could be looking at washed out cylinders and an engine. So, to the right hand side, we have the ball seat also on the valve set, starting to erode down in the center. You can see kind of a little bit of a star pattern to the sides where the high pressure fuel and debris is starting to erode at it. If you notice to about 11 o'clock, you see a little ping. So the offset of the offset star pattern there has caused that ball to not only try to bounce there, excuse me, try to bounce in the center, but it throws it off, and it's been dinging up at about 11 o'clock. So water in the fuel, like I mentioned earlier, not only does it create rust, but the diesel fuel loses the lubricity characteristics, and parts start rubbing on one another. So on the left-hand side, you have the picture of an armature starting to develop rust due to water. And in this case, it was 6 injectors, and all 6 of them look very, very similar, with very irregular running condition on the engine. The second picture is the control rod, and you can see the scoring and the wearing from the lack of lubricity and the rust. Well, if it sits overnight, it's going to create rust. And once that starts moving, because naturally it sits in the injector body and there's a very tight tolerances there, it's going to start rubbing and create scoring. You get scoring of that nature, or worse, you start getting high return flow as well. Picture there to the right, the third picture is just the bottom end to show you the amount of rust that's starting to develop on the no man's land, so to say, pieces of that control rod. The fourth and final picture we got there is the orifice plate. So due to the water into the fuel system, it started eroding in the center eyelet. So looking around the darker circle in the middle, you can start seeing some fretting, kind of a choppy pattern there. So a ball is supposed to seat there to create the proper injection to make the injector function properly. So when it starts eroding like that, you start getting high return, and high return will lead to a hard no start, and will get worse, especially when it starts getting warmer. So in this slide here, we have some of the fuel system components, and just to kind of give you guys an idea of how small the orifices are, as you saw before in the fuel rail pressure sensor, there's a small little orifice for the fuel to go through and to get relieved. Same thing with the fuel rail pressure sensor. Inside of that sensor, where we can't visually inspect it, inside of here, you get fuel that sits up in there. So we could take this out of the rail after being contaminated, clean it off, but there's no way to visually inspect inside how it looks and what the conditions are. So that's why I encourage people not to try to flush systems out instead of replace it. Tech tip, which I learned through the training classes that I've attended, is after performing a fuel filter service, let the truck idle for about 10 to 15 minutes before going out on a good test drive. In those 10, 15 minutes, a technician could be finishing up, writing up the job, writing the mileage on it, etc. Could still be productive while sitting there having it idle in the parking lot before going out for a test drive. Doing so will allow air to purge out of the system nice and slowly. And as we all know, the CP4 is very well known to be sensitive to aerated fuel. So doing this practice could prevent a catastrophic failure. I would also recommend it to any of you that have customers who prefer to do their own services to their vehicle. Tips like that are greatly appreciated to customers. I know if we have a guy here that wants to get filters because he wants to do it, it's one of the tips I would give, and they leave pretty happy. So fuel-related codes with engine performance and complaints. Listed to the right are some fault codes that could be related to fuel contamination. Your P0087, fuel rail pressure low, P0088, your fuel rail pressure high, P0191, another rail pressure sensor performance, P128E. So I'm not saying to automatically assume that there is contamination if these codes are present, but it's quite common to see these two go hand in hand. Obviously, have to do our basic checks, make sure there's no restrictions, as I mentioned in the off-highway section. Do your basic checks, lift pump pressure, no fuel restrictions, etc. Everything's checked out. We've ended up pulling, depending on the application, we've ended up pulling fuel samples from either the back end where the injectors return, where the injector return tees off, pull a fuel sample there by cranking it. Or I believe on the Duramax, it is a little bit more accessible to pull out the M pump on the top of the CP4 pump. In this case here, the bottom picture, all the related fault codes. Pop that out. See metal. Well, you're going to be looking at a complete fuel contamination kit. The picture there to the left is a sample that we have taken from a customer. Give you guys an example is customer came in with a 6.7 Power Stroke with some EGR issues, and there were also some fuel related codes. While we were doing the EGR fixes to this truck in particular, we took a fuel sample and we found the metal. We advised the customer, but the customer just wanted to get the EGR stuff fixed, and we let them know, hey, sure, it's running low because of the EGR. We'll fix it. We drove it and confirmed it that it was having some runnability issues, but it was running okay to make it by. Informed the customer, and they decided they didn't want to do it. And however, we did let them know it could be a ticking time bomb at that case. So in this instance, what we did here, the customer drove it off for about a year or so, called back, and it was extremely derating on it. So still waiting for that thing to come back, but we have a very good suspicion that the contaminants have gotten worse and that there is an issue. One thing I want to talk to, and I'm still kind of surprised, is draining and flushing the fuel tank. Please go the extra mile to drop the fuel tank and flush it out and clean it out. Like I said, I was surprised of the amount of people who actually don't do this. So imagine having to do a fuel system, a very expensive and time labor fuel system for the customer, and some guys out there are just filling it up, draining it, and then filling it up again, installing everything, and hoping for the fuel filter to catch some of the debris and letting it go. Well, imagine having to do it and then having to do it again. Not only are you going to do it again, but you're going to have a very angry customer coming back. As I had mentioned, Alliant Power does have its own diesel fuel additive. We carry three: the UltraGuard, LubriGuard, and the WinterGuard. The UltraGuard is more the premium brand. It's a multifunctional additive, cetane improver, lubricant improver, contains cleaning detergents, provides a anti-gel protection for those here in the Midwest or on the northern side where it gets a little bit chillier in the winter, just a little bit. It helps also remove water by demulsification, which we will get here. We'll talk a little bit about that here after I give you a rundown. Lubrigard is concentrated in lubricant. It's a cetane improver. It helps remove water as well by demulsification. The WinterGuard is pretty much what it's titled. It's an extreme cold weather anti-gel and icebreaker. So all our additives, they come in various size bottles, 8 ounce, 16, 32, 64, and 5 gallon and 55 gallon drums. But all of our fuel additives contain a fuel stabilizer. Because of the low content in sulfur diesel fuel nowadays, fuel starts to degrade within about 6 months. With the Alliant Power additive and the fuel stabilizer it contains into it, it helps maintain and improve the diesel fuel grade. Now, demulsification. Demulsification is a chemical reaction that causes water to suspend from the diesel fuel into a larger water molecule so it can come down, drip, and collect effectively in the fuel water separator. So that is how that works. Also, all our diesel fuel additives are safe on the after treatment systems. The kits currently offered, we have a pretty good coverage on the light duty side. The Ford 6.4 liter AP 64920. On the Ford 6.7 liter side, we have 3 kits. The DKT 111467 will cover the year 2011 to 2014 Super Duty 6.7 Super Duty pickup trucks and will fit your 2011 to 2016 cab chassis. The DKT 151667 will fit the 2015 to 2016 pickups. Up till 2016, as I mentioned in the DKT 111467, once 2017 hit, the diesel pickup and the cab chassis got onto the same board with the injectors and the injection pump. So DKT 171867 will fit the 2017 through a 2019 pickup and cab chassis. On the GM side, we have the coverage on both the LML and the LGH. DKT 1116 LML is 2011 to 2016 LML pickup trucks, and the DKT 1116 LGH is for your engine applications found on the Savannah, Sierra, your Savannah and Express, vans. Just a quick tip, the injectors from LGH are D-rated, so do not substitute them for a LML. If the truck is an LML, do not substitute them with the LGH injectors. They are lower horsepower. Recently, we have launched the GM66 L5P contamination kit, Alliant Power exclusives. The AP 54820 and the AP 54821, which is the L5D. The L5D is found in your larger your 45, 5500 pickups and your internationals as well. The international truck, the international brand, I think is the VS or CS series. I don't remember off the top of my head. Kits to be released here in the future are the exclusive Isuzu 7.8 liter contamination kit, which we will talk a little bit later on. So all our kits are matched to the OE recommendation of parts needed to be replaced if they were a contamination scenario. We've also added other components to the kit to improve it over the OE recommendations. We also offer a few additional add-ons to make it a premium, which we will talk about a little bit later in the next slide. So contamination kit enhancement, we offer the fast fuel system, which separates from our contamination which is separate from our contamination kits. The fast fuel system is an aftermarket fuel supply pump with an added filtration system. You can also get just the transfer pump from the FAS itself without any filtration. There's also, these kits complete with all the wiring and all the hardware needed to adapt it to your diesel pickup. There is also a fuel heater that is an optional item. It helps if I get you guys to the next slide. There is also a heater that you could add for a diesel fuel heater for us here in the chillier northern side of the United States. These fast pumps have been really popular with the GM application, starting down from the LV7 generation. From factory, GM did not have a lift pump to the supply system, so they had to rely on the gear pump on the back of the injection pump to draw fuel out from the tank. But overall, this setup here is getting popularity amongst all the diesel pickups to prevent any aerated fuel. And not only you get that prevention of aerated fuel, but you get the benefit of the extra filtration. Cover a little bit about the Ford 6.4 liter Power Stroke 64920 contamination kit. Again, this is an exclusive kit. All the gaskets and parts are needed to do the job. The most common failure on this fuel system in particular is the high pressure fuel pump sending metal throughout the fuel system, which may lead to, pretty common is a P0088 and a P087 with runnability issues. So rule of thumb, if you get these codes, I mean, you do your checks, check for supply pressure. You also check for supply pressure, make sure everything, your connectors are good, and resistance for the service procedure. And one of the rule of thumbs that we have is you start getting these codes, and quick simple check is pop out that secondary filter underneath the hood. And if there is metal down at the bottom of the bowl, well, you can pretty much condemn the system, the fuel system needing a complete fuel contamination kit. Again, flushing out components in this fuel system is not sufficient enough to get everything out. Prior to this kit being released, just taking calls over the phone was, you would have guys replacing the injectors in the pump, but they would be flushing out the fuel cooler. Well, they put a clear line onto it. Yes, you can see the metal coming out with the fresh fuel, but there's no way to visually inspect it. There's a bunch of crevices and cavities inside of there that a larger piece of debris could be wedged in there. And once it's freshly operated, you can bet that it's just kind of a ticking time bomb where it can make its way past and get back into the fuel system. So complete kit when there's a fuel contamination kit scenario. So here we got a look of the high pressure fuel pump. As you can see, the metal there on the back of the transfer pump is where it's a really common source of it to come, and typically due to lack of lubrication in the diesel fuel. So we recommend running a diesel fuel additive to help prevent that. So the pressure control valve on the left-hand side, I just have there as a reference to show you, kind of mimics the same thing as the Bosch fuel rail pressure sensor. So inside of the body, you have fuel, diesel fuel. It's filled up with diesel fuel. On the top side of the connector, there's diesel fuel. So you get any sort of contaminants, it's going to make its way up, and contaminated fuel is going to sit up there. Like I said, there's no visual way to confirm that you got everything out by flushing the pump. It's kind of one of those things when we test the mirrors, just kind of check it, and you get a customer that don't really tell the whole story. I just want the pump tested. There's a couple codes related, so take it off and immediately see metal. I'll advise the customer, hey, you're going to be looking at a complete fuel system where you can't do anything about the pump. On the 6.7 liter Power Stroke fuel contamination kits, we got an image of what is in your kit. We got the model year coverage there. as well with the OEM cross-reference. The kit is composed as well with the OE recommendation and parts to replace. Currently working on enhancing the kit by adding the fuel coolers and the filters, as it's not pictured right now in this photo. So we are working on that. Also, some aftermarket enhancements that are out there are the bypass kit, which we haven't really gotten too much into it, but they are out there. Haven't done, like myself, I haven't done too much studies on it. So, but guys are out there and they're putting them on as a add-on to their contamination kits. In the GM 66 LML LGH kits pictured, same here, bill of materials. Kit is also based off of the OE recommendations in case of a contamination case. Currently working on adding the 9th injector to this kit. As mentioned earlier, the 9th injector shares the same fuel coming from the injectors and the pump. So any sort of contamination is going to lead back to that 9th injector. So don't want to overlook it, and we want to get that replaced. Here is excuse me. Here is the latest release in our Alliant Power side is the L5P and the L5B Duramax contamination kit. Being it's a relatively new kit, did not have a complete laminar shot of all the contents. But as you can see, you got the Denso HP 3 pump and your Denso injectors. You do have 8, not just 4. We're not shorting you up. We have the complete gasket set, complete gasket kit to install the pump, complete gaskets to do the cylinder number 3 injector, as you got to remove some EGR components. All the lines that needed to be replaced per the OE because of the one-time use. Not pictured in the contamination kit picture here is the fuel cooler, which we are adding that right off the bat. Your fuel return and supply lines going up to the pump, and your fuel filter, along with your 2 left-hand and right-hand side fuel rails. And also being added to this one is the 9th injector. So last, I want to touch briefly about the kit that is in process, the Zuzu 7.8 contamination kit, and some enhancements we are doing on that. Previously, we had been focused quite a bit on the light-duty applications, but per request and some issues that were, well, common scenarios that we see and hear about is contamination in the larger W and C series GM work trucks. Although there is no diesel exhaust fluid after treatment needed on this system, you still have the amount of since the amount of these trucks are out on the field working, they're exposed to dirt and debris, and it's quite common to see that. In these trucks with the contamination. So quite common symptoms are runnability issues. We've had a hard start, no start, because of the debris starting to eat at the internals of the injection system. So kind of a couple things that we've done to upgrade here is we've added a 2-micron filter. As you can see to the left-hand side, we replaced the factory 4-micron final fill filter. Actually found a filter base that mounts up in place of it. Kind of looks like it's levitating there in air, but it's not. It's mounted where the original fuel filter base would be. And by adding a 2-micron filter, well, obviously you're adding a little bit of a restriction to the fuel system. So to aid to that, we've added solely a sole purpose transfer pump with no filtration, since we've already done that. That transfer pump mounts pretty nicely to the opposite side of the already factory OE primary fuel filter. So not only are you getting the restriction overcoming, but you are also getting an overall upgrade, because this system did not come with a factory lift pump like the GMs did. So it's gonna aid it and get a constant pressure going up to the fuel system. So that pretty much wraps up my presentation on the diesel fuel contamination. I want to thank you guys for stopping out and listening in to my presentation. If you guys have any questions, please let us know. Otherwise, if you are like me and you're kind of sitting in seminars and you think about something late at night at the most awkward times, please feel free to reach out to us. Email us at techsupport@alliantpower.com or give us a buzz. We'll be more than welcome to chat with you, either myself or one of my other colleagues in the technical support area of Alliant Power. The 800-735-9775 is the best number to get a hold of us. So with that said, again, thank you and have a great day, and we'll leave this to any questions if anybody has any.